No doctor could save the Vampire King's dying mom, until single mom Waitress healed her instantly. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Let's dive into today's story. A cold winter wind blew through the narrow streets of the city, and Maria shuffled through the snowy sidewalks, her hands wrapped tightly around her jacket as she trudged forward. She was just an ordinary waitress at a small diner, living a simple life with her young son. Things were never easy for her. The rent was always due, the bills piled up, and she could barely make ends meet, but she did it. She had to. She had to give her son everything she could, even if it meant going without. That night, Maria had just finished a long shift when she was asked to cover for someone at the elite Crimson Court Hotel. She didn't want to, but the extra money was tempting. Little did she know, this one shift would change her life forever. As she walked into the Grand Hotel, her worn shoes clicking against the marble floor, she felt out of place. The opulence of the space was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting light onto the polished floor below. People in suits and gowns walked gracefully, chatting and laughing, but Maria felt like a ghost, a mere servant amidst the glamour. She approached her assigned station, a corner near the entrance, where the guests wouldn't pay attention to her. But it wasn't just any guest tonight. He was the Vampire King. Tall, imposing, with an aura of cold power, his eyes, dark as night, scanned the room with a predatory gaze. Maria didn't know who he was at first, but she could feel his presence. She could feel the weight of his stare, the chilling intensity that made her shiver. It wasn't long before their eyes met, and for a brief moment, she felt something unspoken pass between them. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her work, but the man was everywhere. Maria was just about to deliver a tray of drinks when disaster struck. She stumbled, the tray tipping over, and wine splashed across the dark suit of the man who had been watching her. Her heart skipped a beat as she muttered apologies, mortified. He stood still for a moment, the entire room falling silent. For a second, Maria thought her life was over. But then he spoke. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "It's fine," he said, looking at her with something unexpected in his eyes, something softer than she'd ever imagined coming from someone like him. The Vampire King. She didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning. As she looked into his eyes, she realized something. This was no ordinary man. And before she knew it, she was pulled into a world she never thought could exist. One where magic, power, and healing abilities would intertwine. Maria had no idea that her simple, unassuming touch would change everything. Her life, her son's future, and the fate of the Vampire King's family were about to be rewritten forever. The room was silent, the weight of the moment heavy between them. Maria stood frozen, her eyes wide as she stared at the Vampire King, whose crimson gaze never left hers. Her heart was racing, the room suddenly feeling too hot, too crowded. She had spilled wine on the man's expensive suit, and yet he hadn't reacted with the fury she had expected. Instead, he simply stared at her, his eyes dark, cold, but with a flicker of something more. Something she couldn't quite place. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about him, his presence, the way the air around him seemed to thicken, that made her feel both terrified and strangely drawn to him. "I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," the Vampire King interrupted, his voice smooth and calm, the kind of voice that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. He stepped closer, his tall frame looming over her, but his demeanor was strangely gentle, like he was waiting for her to understand something she didn't yet know. Maria could barely breathe. She didn't know how long they stood there, locked in that odd, charged moment. But then, the king took a step back and glanced down at the wine stain on his suit. "It's just a stain," he said, and the words seemed to carry a weight beyond what they should have. "But I expect better from someone in your position. Be more careful." His tone wasn't harsh, but there was an undeniable authority in his words that sent a shiver down her spine. Maria nodded, trying to regain her composure, but her hands were still trembling. The Vampire King turned away from her, and the tension in the room seemed to lift, but her heart was still racing. She hadn't realized it before, but there was something about him, something that both terrified and fascinated her. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of her entanglement with the Vampire King. Later that evening, after the party ended, Maria went back to her small apartment, her mind swirling with thoughts she couldn't process. What had just happened? Why had the king been so calm? What was it about him that made her feel like she was in the presence of something ancient, something powerful? She couldn't shake the image of his eyes, those dark, cold eyes that seemed to see right through her. As she prepared dinner for herself and her son, Maria tried to focus on the normal, everyday life she led, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the strange encounter. The next morning, as she opened the door to her small diner, she found a letter waiting for her. It was from the Vampire King. He requested her presence at the Crimson Court. At first, she thought it was some kind of mistake. Why would someone like him want to see her? But the letter was unmistakable, bearing the royal seal of the Vampire King. Confusion and unease filled her, but she had no choice but to obey. She put on her best uniform and made her way to the Crimson Court once again, her heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived, she was led to a grand hall, and there, in the center, stood the Vampire King. He was even more imposing up close, his presence overwhelming. "I've been informed that you possess a rare gift," the king said, his voice softer than before, but still filled with an undeniable power. Maria blinked, unsure of what he meant. "I'm just a waitress," she replied hesitantly. "I don't know what you're talking about." The king's gaze never wavered. "You healed my mother." Maria's heart skipped a beat. "Your mother?" she repeated, confused. "She's dying," the king explained. "And you, without knowing it, have a power that could save her." Maria took a step back, her mind racing. She didn't know what he was talking about. How could she have healed his mother? She had only touched her briefly when the king's mother had been in a deep sleep, a coma from which no one had been able to wake her. But in that brief moment, Maria had felt something warm, something that had made her believe she could help. But it was also confusing. "I don't understand," Maria said, her voice trembling. "I don't have any powers. I'm just a regular woman. I don't know how I could have healed your mother." The king studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You do not know it yet, but your bloodline is connected to an ancient magic," he said softly. "The healing power you possess comes from a source older than even my kind." Maria's mind spun as he spoke. She didn't understand any of it, but there was one thing she knew for sure. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Maria stood in the grand hall, her mind racing as she tried to process what the Vampire King had just said. Healing powers? Her? The thought seemed absurd, but there was no denying the strange sensation she had felt when she touched his mother. She had only thought she was helping her, but could it really have been something more? "I don't understand," Maria said, her voice trembling slightly. "How is that even possible? I'm just a waitress. I don't have any powers. I don't know what you're talking about." The king studied her intently, his gaze unwavering. "You may not realize it yet, but you come from an ancient bloodline," he said, his voice calm but firm. "A bloodline that carries powers long forgotten. Powers that have been passed down through generations, hidden in plain sight." Maria's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. "Ancient bloodline?" she whispered, trying to grasp the weight of his words. "I don't know what you mean." The king's expression softened just slightly, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "You were unaware of it, but your family's lineage is tied to something far older than any of us. The magic that flows through your veins is a rare and powerful gift." Maria took a step back, her mind spinning. This was all too much for her to comprehend. She had always thought she was just a regular woman, struggling to make ends meet. She had no idea that there was something special about her. "But why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why now?" The king's eyes darkened. "Because my mother is dying," he replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "She has been cursed for centuries, and no one has been able to heal her. We have tried everything, but nothing has worked. The curse is powerful, and we thought there was no hope left. But then you touched her, and something changed." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. "I didn't do anything," she protested. I just touched her." The king's gaze softened, and he took a step toward her. "You did more than that," he said, his voice gentle but filled with authority. You awakened something in her, something that no one else could reach. You have the power to save her, Maria. But you must come with me and learn how to control it. Maria hesitated. Her life had just been turned upside down. She had never imagined she would be in a situation like this. She was just a simple woman, a waitress with no special talents or abilities. But now, she was being told that she had the power to heal the vampire king's dying mother. Could it really be true? What do I have to do? Maria asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her head. The king looked at her with a mix of determination and something else, something softer. You must come with me to the Crimson Court, he said. There, we can help you understand your powers and how to use them. But it will not be easy. You will face challenges and dangers, and you must be prepared for what is to come. Maria glanced down at her hands, still trembling slightly. She had always felt like she was just going through the motions of life, never imagining that she was capable of something extraordinary. But now, the world was opening up before her in ways she couldn't have predicted. I don't know if I can do this, Maria admitted, her voice filled with uncertainty. I'm just a regular person. What if I fail? The king stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You are more than you know, he said softly. Your gift is not just about healing others. It is about understanding the balance between life and death, light and dark. You have the power to change things, Maria, but you must believe in yourself. Maria swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing heart. She had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. The king extended his hand to her, and for a moment, Maria hesitated. She had no idea what would happen if she accepted his offer. But deep down, she knew she couldn't turn back. Taking a deep breath, she reached out and grasped his hand. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady now. I'll help your mother. I'll learn whatever it takes. The king's lips curved into a faint smile. You are brave, Maria, he said. And you are not alone. We will help you every step of the way. As she stood there, holding the king's hand, Maria couldn't help but wonder what kind of journey she was about to embark on. But one thing was clear, this was only the beginning. Maria felt a chill as she stepped into the vast, cold hall of the Crimson Court, the grandeur overwhelming. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries, each one telling a story of forgotten times. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystal prisms casting a cold glow over the stone floors. She was led by a quiet servant through the maze of corridors, her thoughts still spinning from the conversation with the vampire king. Was it really possible that she had a power within her, something she had never known about until now? Her mind raced as she tried to understand it all, the weight of her new reality pressing down on her. She had only touched the vampire king's mother for a moment, and yet it had sparked something that had begun to heal the curse that had plagued her for centuries. Now, she was here, in the heart of the vampire king's kingdom, a place she never imagined she would set foot in. She was just a waitress, a simple woman trying to make a living, and yet, somehow, she was tied to something far larger than herself. This way, the servant said, pulling Maria from her thoughts. They walked through a heavy wooden door and into a large chamber. The room was dimly lit, but the faint glow from the fireplace illuminated the stone walls. At the far end of the room, seated on an ornate throne, was the vampire king. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Maria felt that same eerie presence she had felt before. He was like a force of nature, his power undeniable. Maria, he said, his voice calm, but there was a slight edge to it. I trust you have thought about what I said. Maria nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. Yes, Your Majesty. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I'll help however I can. The king's gaze softened, just a little. You've already helped more than you realize, he said. Now, we must train you. You need to understand the power you possess and how to use it. Maria was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. How could she possibly train to use a power she didn't even know she had? How do I start? She asked, her voice small, uncertain. The king stood from his throne, moving toward her with an elegant grace that seemed unnatural. First, you must understand the nature of your gift. It is not just healing, Maria. It is far more complex than that. He extended his hand to her, and Maria hesitated for a moment before placing hers in his. The instant their hands touched, she felt a surge of warmth pulse through her, a powerful energy that seemed to course through her veins. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. This power is ancient, the king continued. It comes from the very heart of magic, from a place that no one understands fully. But we, the ones who carry this gift, have always been feared, and with good reason. He looked into her eyes, his expression serious. You have the power to heal, yes, but you also have the power to destroy. That is why you must learn to control it. Maria's stomach churned. Destroy? She couldn't even fathom using this power for harm. She was just a mother, trying to protect her son. I don't want to destroy anyone, she said quietly. The king's eyes softened, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. No one does. But this power, if left unchecked, can be dangerous. You have to be careful with it. Maria nodded, though the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but there was no turning back now. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice more confident now. The king smiled, a rare, fleeting smile that made his face seem almost human. You need to train. You need to learn how to harness the energy inside you. We have the means here to help you, to teach you. But it will not be easy. It will take time, patience, and discipline. Maria took a deep breath, steeling herself. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. I'll do whatever it takes. The king studied her for a moment before nodding. Good. We begin tomorrow. As Maria left the chamber, she couldn't help but feel a sense of both fear and excitement. She was about to embark on a journey that would change her life forever. But as much as she feared what lay ahead, there was also a strange sense of destiny pulling her forward. She didn't know how to control the power inside her, but she would learn. She had to. For herself, for her son, and for the Vampire King's family. The road ahead would be difficult, but she had made her choice. And now, there was no turning back. The next day, Maria stood before a large, ornate door in one of the deepest chambers of the Crimson Court. The king had instructed her to come here to begin her training. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she reached for the door handle. She had no idea what to expect, but the king's words from the night before echoed in her mind. He had told her she had the power to heal and destroy, and now it was time to learn how to control that power. As she pushed the door open, she was greeted by the sight of a dimly lit room. The walls were lined with ancient scrolls and books, some so old that the edges were frayed, others bound in leather that had long since faded with age. In the center of the room stood a large stone pedestal, and atop it, a glowing crystal pulsed with a soft light. Maria stepped closer, feeling an inexplicable pull toward it. Welcome, a voice called from the shadows. Maria looked up and saw the king standing by the far wall, watching her closely. His dark eyes held a mixture of expectation and something else, concern perhaps. She couldn't quite read him. This is where you will begin your training, he continued. This crystal is the key to unlocking your true potential. It contains the energy that flows through your bloodline. But before we begin, you must first understand the risks of what you are about to undertake. Maria swallowed hard. What kind of risks? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. The king stepped forward, his presence commanding. The power you carry is dangerous, he said. If it is not controlled, it can consume you. It can turn you into something you never intended to be. He paused, watching her carefully. There are many who would seek to exploit your abilities. And there are others who would see you destroyed to prevent that power from ever being used. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. She had known that this would be dangerous, but hearing it from the king made the reality all too real. But you have the potential to change everything, he said, his tone softer now. The curse that has plagued my family for centuries can only be broken by you. Your power, once fully awakened, will be the key to saving my mother and undoing the damage done to my bloodline. Maria nodded slowly, trying to steady her nerves. I'm ready, she said, her voice more confident now. I'll do whatever it takes. The king's expression softened ever so slightly. Good, he said. Then let us begin. He motioned to the pedestal. Focus on the crystal. Let it connect with you. Let it show you the path. Maria stepped forward and reached out for the glowing crystal. The moment her fingers made contact with it, she felt a surge of energy course through her body. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before. Warmth, power, and a strange sense of connection. Her vision blurred, and she felt as though she were being pulled into the crystal itself. Suddenly, She was no longer in the room with the king. She was standing in a vast, dark landscape, surrounded by swirling mist. The air was thick with energy, and she could feel the presence of something ancient, something alive. It was as if the world itself was speaking to her. "This is your power," a voice whispered, echoing in her mind. "It is a part of you, and you are a part of it. You must learn to wield it, to control it, or it will consume you." Maria tried to focus, to understand what was happening, but the voice was fading. The energy around her grew stronger, overwhelming her senses. She gasped, struggling to stay grounded. "Focus," the voice urged. "Focus on what you want to achieve. Harness your energy." Maria closed her eyes and tried to calm herself. She focused on her breathing, trying to steady her heart. She thought of the vampire king's mother, of the curse that had plagued her family for centuries. She thought of her own son and the life she wanted to give him. She reached deep within herself, feeling the power inside her stir. Slowly, she began to feel more in control. The energy around her started to settle, and the mist began to fade. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the room with the king. He was watching her with a steady gaze, as if he had been waiting for her to return. "Well done," he said. "You've begun to understand your power. But this is just the beginning. There is much more to learn, and the road ahead will not be easy. But I believe you are capable." Maria nodded, a sense of determination settling over her. She had taken the first step toward understanding the power inside her, and she was ready for whatever came next. But as she looked at the king, she couldn't help but wonder what other challenges lay ahead. And what would it cost her to save the vampire king's family and her own? The following days were filled with rigorous training, each session more demanding than the last. Maria's body was exhausted, her mind stretched thin as she worked to control the power that flowed through her. The king's words echoed in her head constantly. "Harness your energy. Focus." It wasn't easy. Every time she thought she had control, the power surged uncontrollably, threatening to overwhelm her. But each time she fought back, learning more about herself, about the ancient magic that lay dormant within her. The king watched her closely, his gaze always sharp, calculating. He said little, offering only the occasional instruction or word of encouragement. But Maria could feel the weight of his expectations, and it pushed her harder. She had to master this. For the king's mother, for her son, and for herself. One morning, after another long and grueling training session, the king called her to his private chambers. Maria entered the room, her steps slow, her body aching, but there was a sense of resolve in her eyes. The king was standing by the window, looking out over the vast, snow-covered landscape. When he turned to face her, there was a look in his eyes she couldn't quite place. "Maria," he began, his voice unusually soft, "you've made great progress. But we're reaching a point where you must learn to wield the power in ways you haven't yet imagined." Maria swallowed hard, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The king's gaze darkened. "There are forces at play here, Maria. Forces that have been in motion long before you arrived. Your power is not just a gift, it is a weapon. And it is a weapon that others will want to control." Maria's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" she repeated. The king's face hardened, his expression unreadable. "There are those who would seek to use you for their own gain," he said. "And there are those who would destroy you to prevent you from using your abilities. You must be prepared to defend yourself, to fight." Maria took a step back, the weight of his words sinking in. She had known the risks, of course, but to hear the king speak of them so plainly, so coldly, made it all the more real. "I'm just a waitress," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to fight." The king's eyes softened, just a little. "You are more than that, Maria," he said gently. "You have the strength to protect yourself. You have the power to fight." He moved closer to her, his presence imposing yet strangely comforting. "But it will take time, and you must trust me." Maria nodded, though doubt still lingered in her chest. Could she really become the person the king was asking her to be? She didn't know, but there was no turning back now. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. The king stepped away from her, walking to a small table in the corner of the room. He picked up a long, slender dagger, its blade glinting in the soft light. "This is a weapon," he said, holding it out to her. "It is a tool of power, a tool that will help you control the energy inside you. Maria looked at the dagger in his hand, her breath catching in her throat. She had never held a weapon before. The idea of using one, let alone controlling the magic within her, was daunting. I want you to learn how to wield this, the king continued. I want you to feel the energy in it, to connect with it. This is your next step. Maria hesitated, the weight of the task before her almost too much to bear. But she reached out, taking the dagger from the king's hand. It felt cold at first, but then, as her fingers wrapped around it, a strange warmth began to spread through her. The power inside her stirred, reacting to the blade, and for the first time, Maria felt a connection to something beyond herself. She closed her eyes, focusing on the energy coursing through the dagger. She felt it, a pulse, a rhythm, like a heartbeat that matched her own. She let it flow through her, allowing it to guide her movements. Slowly, she raised the dagger, her hand steady, her grip firm. When she opened her eyes, she saw the king watching her with a mix of approval and expectation. "Well done," he said. "But this is only the beginning. You must learn to control not only the power within you, but also the power that resides in the world around you. You are not just learning to fight, Maria. You are learning to control fate itself." Maria nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come so far in such a short time, but the road ahead still seemed long and uncertain. The king was right. There were forces at play, and she had to be prepared. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I will learn. I will do whatever it takes." The king's lips curved into a faint smile. "I know you will," he said. "Now, let's begin your training in earnest. The world outside these walls is waiting for you, and you must be ready." The training continued, each day blending into the next. Maria's mind was consumed with the lessons the king had imparted upon her. Every movement, every breath, every thought had to be in perfect harmony with the energy within her. It was exhausting, but with each passing day, she could feel herself growing stronger. She had learned to control the dagger, and now, she was learning how to use the power that lay dormant in her bloodline. But despite her progress, Maria felt a growing sense of unease. There were moments when she felt the power inside her surge, threatening to break free in a way she couldn't control. It scared her, and what scared her even more was the thought of what might happen if she lost control. "Focus," the king would say whenever she faltered. "You must learn to control it, or it will control you." Maria's hands were still trembling from the last training session as she entered the king's chambers once again. He was waiting for her, his expression unreadable as always. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice steady. Maria hesitated before answering. "I'm getting there, but it's harder than I thought." The king nodded, his gaze piercing. "This is not something that can be learned in a day, Maria. It will take time. You must trust the process." Maria clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. She knew he was right, but there were moments when it felt as if the power inside her was too much to bear. "What happens if I can't control it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The king's gaze softened, but there was still a coldness to it. "You will learn to control it," he said, "or you will perish." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Maria felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "You're not alone in this," the king added, his voice softer now. "I will help you, but you must trust me." Maria nodded, her heart racing. "I trust you," she said, though even she wasn't sure if she fully meant it. The king stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good," he said. "Now, we must move on to the next step in your training." Maria's breath caught in her throat as she followed the king through the hallways of the Crimson Court. She had no idea what he had in store for her next, but she knew it would not be easy. They reached a large, circular room, its stone floor cold beneath her feet. The room was empty except for a large stone pedestal in the center, on which sat a small vial filled with a glowing, golden liquid. "This," the king said, "is the elixir of power. It is a rare substance, one that has been passed down through the generations of my family. It enhances the abilities of those who possess the bloodline, allowing them to access their full potential." Maria's heart raced as she looked at the vial. She could feel the power emanating from it, a pull that was almost magnetic. "What do I need to do with it?" she asked, her voice tight. The king stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You must drink it," he said. "But be warned, it is not without risk. The elixir will awaken the full extent of your power, but it can also overwhelm you. If you are not ready, it will destroy you. Maria's mind raced as she looked at the vial. She had no idea what to expect, but the king's words weighed heavily on her. Could she really drink it? Could she handle the power it would unlock? Are you ready? The king asked, his voice calm, but there was an underlying intensity to it. Maria hesitated for a moment, her hands shaking, but then she nodded. Yes, I'm ready. The king handed her the vial, and she took it in her hands, feeling the warmth of the liquid inside. She could feel the power inside it, and it made her nervous. But this was the next step. This was what she had been training for. She lifted the vial to her lips, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment the liquid touched her tongue, she felt a surge of energy flood through her, more intense than anything she had ever experienced before. It was as if the very earth beneath her feet was shaking, and she could feel the power within her grow stronger, more overwhelming. The world around her seemed to blur as the energy coursed through her, and she felt as though she was being consumed by it. She gasped for breath, her body trembling as the power threatened to overwhelm her. Focus! The king's voice echoed in her mind, cutting through the haze. Focus, Maria. Control it. Maria closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to center herself. She could feel the energy swirling inside her, chaotic and wild. But she was learning to control it. Slowly, she focused on the warmth in her chest, the power that was now part of her. She felt it settle, the energy now flowing in a way that felt more controlled. The shaking in her hands stopped, and the world around her began to stabilize. When she opened her eyes, she found herself standing in the center of the room, her body still humming with the energy. The king stood before her, watching her closely. Well done, he said, his voice low and approving. You have passed the first test. But this is only the beginning, Maria. The true test lies ahead. Maria nodded, her breath still coming in short gasps. She had done it. She had taken the elixir, and she had survived. But she knew that this was just the start. There was more to come, and she had to be ready. Maria stood before the vampire king, her body still humming with the power she had unleashed. Her heart was racing, the pulse of energy inside her almost too overwhelming to bear. She had done it. She had taken the elixir of power and survived, but now she had to face the reality of what that meant. The king's eyes were fixed on her, calculating, as though he was assessing her readiness for what was to come next. You've proven you can handle the power, he said, his voice steady and unwavering. But now, we will see how well you can control it under pressure. Maria's stomach tightened. She had no idea what he meant, but she trusted him, or at least, she had to. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. The king gave her a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I mean, you must learn to use the power in real-world situations. This is not a game, Maria. The stakes are far higher than you realize. You are not just a tool to be used. You are a weapon. And, like any weapon, you must be sharpened. He turned away, moving toward a table filled with various weapons, including swords, daggers, and armor. He picked up a small dagger and held it in his hand, turning it over thoughtfully. I want you to fight me, he said, his voice cold but steady. Prove to me that you can control the energy inside you in a real combat situation. Maria's breath caught in her throat. Fight him? The vampire king? Her body tensed at the thought. She had only just begun to learn how to control her powers, and now, she was being asked to fight the very person who had been training her. I can't fight you, she said, shaking her head. I don't know enough. The king's eyes darkened, and for a moment, he looked almost dangerous. Then you will never be ready, he said softly. You have power within you. But unless you can learn to control it in a fight, you will be nothing more than a danger to yourself and others. Maria swallowed hard. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. Okay, she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. I'll fight you. The king's lips curved into a slight smile. Good. Show me what you've learned. He stepped back, raising his hands in a defensive stance. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the energy within her, calling it up from the depths of her being. She could feel the power, the warmth that flowed through her veins, and she tried to focus it into her hands. The moment she raised her hand, a burst of energy shot from her fingertips, but it was too strong, too uncontrolled. The force of it slammed into the wall, causing a deep crack to form in the stone. She gasped, stumbling back in shock. The king didn't move, his gaze never leaving her. "Control it," he said, his voice low. "Focus." Maria clenched her fists, trying to steady her breathing. She had to do this. She had no choice. She closed her eyes, reaching for the calm center that had eluded her in the past. Slowly, the power within her began to settle, and this time, when she extended her hand, a small, controlled burst of energy shot toward the king. He raised his hand, effortlessly deflecting the energy with a flick of his wrist. "Better," he said, nodding slightly. "But you must do more than just direct your power. You must learn to anticipate your opponent's moves, to think several steps ahead. You must become one with your power." Maria nodded, determination building within her. She had no choice but to push herself beyond her limits. She charged at him, using the dagger he had given her as an extension of her will. As she swung it toward him, she felt the power surge again, this time more focused, more controlled. The king sidestepped with ease, his movements so fluid it was as if he could see the future. He countered with a strike of his own, the blade glinting in the low light. Maria barely managed to block it in time, the force of the blow sending her stumbling backward. She gasped for breath, her hands shaking. "Focus," the king said again, his voice steady. "Do not rely on strength alone. You must learn to read your opponent's movements, to feel their intentions before they even act." Maria wiped the sweat from her brow, frustration beginning to build. She had fought, she had controlled the energy, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. She had to learn to be more, to become the weapon the king believed she could be. She squared her shoulders and took another step forward, determined not to back down. This time, when she moved, it was with purpose, every action calculated, every step taken with precision. The king watched her closely, his gaze never wavering. When she struck again, this time with more accuracy, he finally nodded in approval. "You're learning," he said. "But this is just the beginning. There is much more for you to master. The true test is not just your ability to control your power, but how you use it when everything is on the line." Maria felt the weight of his words sink in. She had come a long way, but the journey ahead was still uncertain. She had only scratched the surface of her power, and now she had to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. For the first time, she truly understood the stakes. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the Vampire King's family, her own future, and everything she had worked so hard to protect. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was something more, and she would do whatever it took to survive. Maria stood in the courtyard of the Crimson Court, the cold air stinging her skin as she faced the looming gates. Her training had brought her to this point, and now, the true test was finally upon her. The king had warned her time and again that mastering the power within her was only the beginning. Now, she was about to face the consequences of what she had learned. She wasn't just training to control her power anymore. She was preparing for battle. The king had sent word that there was a threat approaching, an enemy faction, one that sought to use her powers for their own gain. They had been watching her progress, waiting for the right moment to strike. The time had come. The king had arranged a meeting with his allies, but Maria was to go ahead and face the enemy alone. Her role in this was no longer that of a mere pawn. She was the weapon, the key to breaking the curse that had bound the Vampire King's family for centuries. The wind picked up, howling through the courtyard as Maria walked with purpose, her footsteps echoing against the stone. She reached the center, where the king had instructed her to wait. The night was still, the only sound the distant rustling of the trees. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a grace that was almost too fluid to be human. It was a vampire, his face hidden beneath a dark cloak. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice cold, mocking. "The healer, the one who will save your master. You think you can stop us? You think your power is enough to save him?" Maria's heart skipped a beat, but she stood her ground. "I'm not here to save anyone," she said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up inside her. "I'm here to protect what's mine." The vampire laughed, a low, menacing sound. "Protect what's yours? You have no idea what you're dealing with, little human. You're just a tool in a much larger game. And when we're done with you, there will be nothing left but ashes." He raised his hand, and the air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. Maria could feel it, a pressure building in the air, and she knew that he was about to strike. But she was ready. She reached deep within herself, tapping into the power that had been awakened over the past few weeks. Her fingers crackled with energy as she called upon it, focusing on her target. The vampire lunged at her, his speed almost too fast to track, but Maria was quicker. She dodged to the side, her body moving with a fluidity that surprised even her. She extended her hand, sending a burst of energy toward him, but he blocked it with a wave of his own dark power. The collision of their energies sent a shock wave through the air, the ground beneath them trembling. "Not bad," the vampire sneered. "But you're still far from ready." Maria's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never fought like this before, but she could feel the power within her growing stronger with every move, every strike. She was learning. She was becoming what she needed to be. "You're not going to win this fight," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I will stop you." The vampire chuckled, taking a step closer, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You think you can stop us? You're just a tool, a weapon. You have no control." Maria gritted her teeth, fighting back the doubt that threatened to rise within her. She couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. "I have control," she said, her voice fierce. "And I'm not afraid to use it." She stepped forward, her hand outstretched as she summoned the full force of the energy within her. The vampire lunged again, but this time, Maria was ready. She met his attack head-on, sending a wave of pure energy crashing into him. He screamed as the force of it knocked him back, sending him sprawling to the ground. But he was not finished yet. The vampire rose to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You will pay for that," he snarled. "You have no idea what you're up against." He raised his hands, and the air around them shimmered with dark energy. Maria's heart raced, but she stood firm. She knew this was it. This was the moment that would define her. She had to win. With a determined breath, Maria summoned the energy once more, focusing it into a concentrated blast. She sent it hurtling toward the vampire with all the strength she could muster. The explosion of power lit up the night, blinding in its intensity. The vampire screamed in pain as the energy engulfed him, his body writhing as he was consumed by the blast. When the light faded, there was nothing left but ashes. Maria stood, breathing heavily, her body trembling from the effort. She had done it. She had defeated him. The enemy was gone, and with it, the threat to the king's family. But Maria knew that this was only one battle in a much larger war. There were still others who would come for her, others who would try to use her power for their own gain. She wasn't finished yet. The king would need her again, and she would be ready. Maria stood in the aftermath of the battle, her breath heavy in her chest as the dust settled around her. The vampire had been defeated, his dark power reduced to nothing but ashes in the wind. She had done it. She had faced the enemy and emerged victorious, but as the adrenaline began to fade, she felt the weight of what she had just done. The power she had wielded was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. It was raw, dangerous, and it felt almost alive within her. She could feel the energy still swirling inside her, pulsing with life. It had been a test, and she had passed, but what now? The king's words echoed in her mind. "You must learn to control it, or it will consume you." Maria took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to keep moving forward. There was no time to dwell on what had happened. She had done what was necessary, but there was so much more to learn, so many more battles to face. As she turned to leave the courtyard, she was met by the king's presence. He stepped from the shadows, his gaze sharp and calculating as always. "You've done well," he said, his voice low and approving. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her this wasn't over. "But this is only the beginning, Maria. There will be more. And next time, the stakes will be higher." Maria nodded, feeling a pang of unease. She had known the danger was far from over, but hearing it from him made it all too real. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady but her hands still shaking from the fight. The king studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Now we prepare for what's to come," he said. "The enemy you face today was just a small part of a much larger threat. There are others who seek to control the power you possess. They will stop at nothing to use you, to manipulate you. And we cannot allow that to happen." Maria felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had known the risks, but now, hearing the king speak of them so plainly, She understood just how dangerous her position was. She wasn't just some powerless waitress anymore. She was a weapon, a key to an ancient magic that could change the world. And there were those who would do anything to get their hands on it. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice firmer now. The king gave a small, approving nod. "You must learn to harness your abilities fully," he said. "You need to become stronger, faster, and more precise. Every moment you delay, you put us all at risk. Your training is far from over." Maria nodded, determination settling over her. She had faced her first challenge, and she had survived. But the king was right. There was so much more to learn, so many more enemies to face. She wasn't done yet. The king motioned for her to follow him, and she obeyed without question. They made their way through the castle, the cold stone walls reflecting the weight of their steps. She could feel the tension in the air, the pressure of what was to come bearing down on her. When they reached the training room, the king turned to face her, his eyes intense. "You have the power to heal," he said, his voice steady. "But that power is not just about saving others. It is about understanding the balance between life and death, light and dark. You must learn to see beyond what is in front of you. You must learn to anticipate, to read the signs before they happen." Maria took a deep breath, trying to focus. She had heard him speak of balance before, but now, it was more important than ever. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice filled with conviction. The king's gaze softened slightly, but his next words were sharp. "Good. But remember, Maria, you are not alone in this. There are others who will help you. You need to learn to trust them as much as you trust yourself." Maria didn't understand at first, but the king's words lingered in her mind as she began her next round of training. She was pushed to the limit, her body and mind tested like never before. Every strike, every move, was calculated, each step leading her closer to mastering the power within her. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she thought she couldn't go any further, when the power inside her felt like it was slipping out of her control. But each time, she fought back, digging deeper, finding strength she didn't know she had. The king watched her closely, never intervening unless absolutely necessary. His silence was both encouraging and intimidating. "You are ready," he said after what felt like hours of training. Maria stood, drenched in sweat, her muscles aching from the effort, but there was a new sense of confidence in her eyes. "You are stronger than you realize. But remember, power without control is dangerous. You must learn to trust your instincts, and most importantly, you must trust those around you." Maria nodded, though she still felt unsure. There was so much more to learn, so much more to understand. But for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. And whatever came next, she was ready to face it head on. The weeks passed in a blur of intense training. Maria's body ached from the constant exertion, but her mind had never been sharper. She had learned to harness the power within her more effectively, her control over the energy now stronger than ever before. However, the weight of the king's words still lingered in her mind. "You are not alone in this. There are others who will help you. You must learn to trust them as much as you trust yourself." She had heard these words over and over, but she wasn't sure how to apply them. Trusting others had never been her strong suit. She had always relied on herself, on her own strength, to survive. But here, in the midst of a war she hadn't asked for, she realized that she could not fight alone. She needed to learn how to trust, how to rely on those around her. The king had arranged a meeting with his allies, and Maria was to be a part of it. It was time for her to take the next step, time to see if she could truly trust the people around her. The meeting was held in one of the grand chambers of the Crimson Court, the long table gleaming in the low light of the chandeliers. The king sat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the room as the various leaders of the court gathered. Maria stood beside him, her posture straight, her heart beating in her chest. She was nervous, unsure of what to expect. The room was filled with individuals she had never met, but who all seemed to carry an aura of power, of experience. Some of them glanced at her curiously, others with disdain, but Maria kept her focus, her eyes forward. She was here for a reason. She had a role to play, and she would not fail. "We are gathered here today to discuss the threat that looms over us." The king's voice echoed through the chamber, calm but commanding. "The enemy knows we are vulnerable. They know what Maria can do, and they will stop at nothing to take her power for themselves. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward Maria. She felt a wave of unease wash over her, but she stood tall, not flinching. "We have to prepare for what comes next," the king continued. "We cannot afford to let them gain control over her." The tension in the room was palpable. The other leaders nodded, their expressions grim. "We'll need to increase our defenses," one of them said, a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark eyes. "But we also need to be strategic. We cannot just throw all our resources into one battle. We need to divide and conquer." Another leader, a woman with silver hair and piercing green eyes, spoke up. "And what about her training?" she asked, her gaze shifting to Maria. "She's powerful, yes, but is she ready for what's coming? The enemy we face is not to be underestimated. We've seen what they're capable of." The king's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady. "She's ready," he said. "She has proven herself. Now, it's time to put her skills to the test." Maria's heart pounded in her chest. The room was full of uncertainty, full of people who doubted her. But she couldn't afford to let their doubts affect her. She had already come too far. The king turned to her, his gaze firm. "Maria," he said, his voice low but filled with intensity. "This is your moment. You have the power to change the course of this war. But you must trust those around you. You will need their help." Maria nodded, though she still felt the weight of her fear. Trust was not something that came easily to her, but she knew the king was right. She couldn't do this alone. As the meeting continued, Maria listened carefully, absorbing the strategies that were discussed. She could feel the tension in the room, the heavy expectation that rested on her shoulders. The leaders spoke of alliances, of plans to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold, and of gathering more support from the court's allies. But amidst all the talk of strategy, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She was part of this plan, but she still didn't know if she could trust the people around her. As the meeting drew to a close, the king dismissed everyone, but he motioned for Maria to stay behind. The room emptied quickly, leaving them alone. Maria stood before him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "What's next?" she asked, her voice low. The king studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You will go with our allies to the border," he said. "They will help you train further, teach you the skills you need to survive. The battle is coming, and you must be prepared." Maria felt a wave of unease wash over her. The border was a dangerous place, a territory where the enemy's forces were strongest. "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The king's gaze softened, but there was a coldness to it that sent a shiver down her spine. "Failure is not an option, Maria. You have no choice but to succeed." With those words, the weight of the reality hit her. She was no longer just a simple woman trying to survive. She was a key player in a war that could decide the fate of more than just her own life. The king had placed his trust in her, and now she had to find the strength to trust those around her. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she would face it head-on. She had no other choice. Maria had never felt such a weight upon her shoulders. The journey ahead was daunting, but she had no choice but to step forward. The king's orders were clear. She was to venture to the border, where the enemy's forces were at their strongest. Her training had prepared her, yes, but the reality of the situation began to sink in. There would be no turning back. As the day of departure approached, Maria couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She had spent so many years simply surviving, never knowing that she had a power so vast, so dangerous, that it could change the course of an entire war. Now, she was thrust into a conflict far greater than anything she had ever imagined. She stood before the gates of the Crimson Court, her heart racing as she prepared to leave. The king had trusted her with this mission, but Maria knew that trusting herself was the hardest part. She had never relied on anyone but herself, never had to share the burden of a responsibility so heavy. But this time, there was no choice. The allies the king had sent with her were waiting, figures draped in dark cloaks, their eyes sharp and unreadable. They were experienced warriors, each one carrying a weapon and the weight of their own pasts. Maria had never fought alongside others, never been a part of something larger than herself. Now, she had to find a way to fit in with these strangers, these allies who would help her, or so she hoped. The journey was long and tense, the cold wind cutting through the night as they traveled. Maria had been trained in combat, in the control of her power, but this was different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust. And trust, for Maria, was a foreign concept. She kept to herself during the journey, her mind a whirl of thoughts and doubts. The road stretched out before them, the moonlight reflecting off the snow that covered the ground. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional command from the leader of the group. But as they neared the border, the atmosphere changed. The tension in the air grew thicker, heavier. They were close. Maria could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a deep sense of foreboding that settled over her. The moment they crossed into enemy territory, everything would change. The leader of the group, a tall woman with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, turned to Maria as they neared the border. "You need to be ready," she said, her voice low but firm. "Once we're on the other side, there's no going back." Maria nodded, her hand instinctively resting on the dagger at her side. The power inside her was still there, pulsing just beneath the surface. She knew she could use it to protect herself, but that didn't ease the fear in her chest. The enemy was unlike anything she had ever faced. As they crossed into the enemy's land, the landscape shifted. The trees became sparse, the once frozen ground now soft and muddy. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay. It was as though the very earth had been poisoned. Maria's senses heightened as they moved deeper into the territory, her every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she didn't. She couldn't. She had made a choice, and now she had to see it through. The group came to a halt at the base of a large hill, the enemy's stronghold looming in the distance. The dark walls of the fortress rose high, a symbol of the power the enemy held. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she realized just how outnumbered they were. The enemy was well armed, and their defenses were formidable. But they had one thing the enemy didn't, Maria. She was the key to breaking the curse that had plagued the Vampire King's family for centuries. If she could control the power within her, if she could harness it in the right way, she could bring down the walls that had stood for so long. "We'll strike at dawn," the leader said, her voice steady. "But first, we need to gather information. Maria, you will be the one to infiltrate the stronghold. You're the only one who can move unnoticed." Maria's heart raced. She had never been asked to do anything like this before. Infiltration, espionage, it wasn't the kind of mission she had prepared for. But she knew what was at stake. She was the key, and she couldn't fail. As the night drew on, Maria sat alone by the campfire, her thoughts consumed by what was to come. She had never been a part of something this grand, this dangerous. But now, with the power inside her and the weight of the king's trust on her shoulders, she had to act. She couldn't back down. She had made a vow, to herself, to her son, and to the king. She would do whatever it took to protect them all. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a golden light over the dark, foreboding land. Maria stood, her resolve hardening as she prepared for the mission ahead. It was time to take the next step, to show everyone, including herself, that she was ready for whatever came next. The battle raged around Maria as she infiltrated the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The fortress loomed like a shadow over the battlefield, its black stone walls towering above the chaos. She had never felt such a rush of energy, adrenaline, power, fear, all coursing through her veins as she moved through the corridors with the stealth of a shadow. Her mind was sharp, her instincts heightened by the power inside her. She knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was the final step, the culmination of everything she had trained for, everything she had sacrificed. She could feel the presence of the enemy everywhere, their soldiers, their leaders, moving like dark ghosts in the halls. But Maria was more than just a soldier now. She was the key to bringing it all down. She had learned to control her power, to channel it. And now, she would use it to destroy what had once been unbreakable. The night was her ally as she made her way toward the center of the fortress, where the enemy's leader, a powerful vampire lord, was said to be. Every step she took, every breath she took, felt like a moment suspended in time. The mission was simple: infiltrate, locate the vampire lord, and eliminate him. She was the weapon, and the world around her was waiting for her to strike. She had come so far. Her training had prepared her for this, and now she was ready. But as she reached the chamber at the heart of the fortress, Maria felt a strange unease settle in her chest. The door stood before her, dark and imposing, as though it had been waiting for her. She took a deep breath and pushed it open, her heart racing. Inside, the vampire lord waited for her, sitting calmly on a throne of obsidian, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He knew she was coming. He had known all along. "You're brave, little healer," the vampire lord said, his voice smooth, mocking. "But you are no match for me." Maria's hand went to the dagger at her side, the blade that had become an extension of herself. She knew what she had to do, but the vampire lord's gaze held her in place, his power radiating from him like a storm. "You think you can defeat me?" he continued, a dark smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "You, a mere mortal with powers you can't even control?" Maria's grip tightened around the dagger, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I don't need to control everything," she said, her voice steady. "I just need to stop you." The vampire lord stood, his movements fluid and predatory. "You can try," he said, his smile widening. "But you will fail, just like all the others." He raised his hand, and the air around them seemed to shimmer with dark energy. Maria's heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't afford to hesitate. She stepped forward, drawing on the energy within her. The power surged through her, a wave of heat and light that she directed straight at him. The force of it was like nothing she had ever felt before, and the vampire lord staggered back, surprised by the intensity of her attack. But he quickly recovered, raising his own hand to deflect the blow. The clash of their powers shook the room, sending ripples through the air. "You're strong," the vampire lord said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But you still have much to learn." Maria didn't give him a chance to recover. She lunged, the dagger in her hand glowing with energy. With a swift movement, she drove it forward, the blade cutting through the air with precision. The vampire lord tried to block, but Maria was faster. The dagger struck him in the chest, the force of the blow sending him crashing to the ground. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The vampire lord lay motionless, his eyes wide. In shock, the darkness that had surrounded him slowly dissipating. Maria stood over him, breathing heavily, the adrenaline still coursing through her. She had done it. She had defeated him. But as the silence settled over the chamber, Maria felt the weight of what she had just done. She had taken a life, ended a threat that had hung over her for so long. The power that had once seemed so foreign to her was now a part of who she was. And with that power came a responsibility she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. But as she turned to leave the chamber, she knew that there was no turning back. The Vampire King's family had been saved, and the curse that had bound them was finally broken. The world outside would never be the same, and neither would she. The journey had been long, the sacrifices many, but in the end, Maria had found what she had been searching for, not just the power to fight, but the strength to rise above it all. She had become something more than just a healer, more than just a weapon. She had become a force to be reckoned with. And now, she would face whatever came next with the same determination that had brought her this far. The war was far from over, but Maria was ready for it. Immerse yourself in a thrilling journey with this gripping vampire story, where a woman discovers hidden powers and becomes the key to breaking a centuries-old curse. With epic battles, intense training, and unexpected alliances, this vampire story reveals the complex journey of self-discovery and survival. The main character, a waitress with a mysterious power, faces not only dangerous enemies, but also the challenge of trusting those around her. The story is filled with suspense, action, and powerful moments that will leave you on the edge of your seat. As Maria fights to protect those she loves, she learns that her power is more than just a weapon. It's a force that could change the world. In this vampire story, trust, betrayal, and self-mastery are put to the ultimate test. The stakes are high, and Maria must rise above her fears to defeat her enemies and protect the ones she cares about. The challenges she faces are daunting, but she has the strength within her to overcome them. As the plot unfolds, you will witness epic confrontations and the emotional growth of a character who is forced to face both her inner demons and external threats. This captivating tale of power, magic, and transformation offers everything you expect from great vampire stories, with an unforgettable twist. Get ready for an unforgettable adventure in this exciting vampire story that pushes the boundaries of power and sacrifice. If you enjoy thrilling and dramatic vampire stories filled with action, suspense, and emotional depth, this one is sure to leave a lasting impression.